So welcome back, wiretappers, to the third in this series on the Union Station Massacre. You know, we've been through the day before and all the stuff that happened the day before, how they almost got caught in some little town down in South Missouri as Pretty Boy Floyd and Adam Richetti are coming north. We learned what a drunk Adam Richetti was and what happened when they got here in Kansas City, their hideout here that's still here in Kansas City. There's a really nice house over there in what we call the Brookside neighborhood. And we learned all the shooting that day and how the guy they tried to break out of custody got killed himself. There was a mix up with guns that day and 4 officers got killed. It was crazy that day. I really appreciate y'all tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. As I said, Terrence O'Malley is a great storyteller. Terrence O'Malley has the quintessential documentary that he made years ago about the Kansas City mob, from Black Hand days to Straw Man, which is the name of the title of it, Black Hand Straw Man. Straw Man is the skimming from Las Vegas capers. And if you want a copy of that DVD, it's not streaming anywhere. Get hold of me and I'll get with Terrence and we'll make sure you get a copy. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and on with the third and final installment.
So we have this big shootout at Union Station. So what's going on afterward, right? Well, it's fascinating. It's really interesting. They go back to the house at 6612 Edgevale Road. And, of course, the law enforcement authorities have no idea who did this. They don't have the first clue who did this. So they start conjecturing. You know, it was it Harvey Bailey? Was it, the Ma Barker gang? Was it Alvin Creepy Carpus? Was it my guy, Wilbur, the Tri-State Terror Underhill? Anyway, what happens is, this is really amazing. So later on that evening, Johnny Lazia, he's back at the Harvey restaurant, Union Station. He's holding court as if nothing happened. And of course, he may have been doing this to make it look like a deal. I don't have anything to do with it. When Vern Miller goes and sees him again, and he's, terribly upset. And he said, they started shooting. We didn't start shooting. But once they started shooting, we had to start shooting. And God, we didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry about that. And Vern Miller, or, Johnny Lazia is like, okay, well, you need to, you need to get out of here. You need to leave. And, they said, we'll take care of Pretty Boy Floyd. Okay. But you need to get out of town. And so, sure enough, that's what Vern Miller did. Now, exactly what routes he took and what car he drove and all that stuff, we don't know. But what we do know is that the Lazia gang had been keeping a beautiful Buick automobile under wraps that they had stolen, or somebody had stolen, in St. Louis and brought to Kansas City. And they were just, keeping it for a special purpose, whatever the need might be, that they would need a stolen automobile. So they gave that car to Pretty Boy Floyd and Adam Richetti, and they also gave them a number of weapons and said, get out of town. And that car was later found in Ohio, burned with at least one, but I think 2 bodies in that automobile. It wasn't Ricchetti or Pretty Boy Floyd, but it also shows that, they did something to somebody. Pretty Boy Floyd and Adam Richetti make their way up to Buffalo, New York, and they have with them, accompanying them, a couple of ladies from Kansas City. The Baird sisters, I believe, Rose and Beulah Baird, were their names, and they were sisters. And again, Pretty Boy Floyd and another cohort had killed their husbands some while back in Kansas City to get rid of them, get them out of the picture. And so now you got Adam Richetti and Pretty Boy Floyd with these 2 ladies, and they go, and under aliases, they rent an apartment in Buffalo, New York, and they just hang out there, and they just lay low. And so that is, sometime from June, July, however long it took them to get up there and situate themselves. They remained there all the way until October of 1934. So they remained there for approximately, what would that be, 16 months. He was the problem. Adam Richetti, nobody knew who he was, but everybody knew who. They had heard of Pretty Boy Floyd. And so, but meanwhile, Vern Miller makes his way back to the East Coast, where he hooks up with some of the characters for whom he had done some dirty work in the past, and tries to get them to help him. And I believe that the fellow that he hooked up with is a guy named Abraham Zwillman, and he was connected with Lepke Buckhalter, if you know these names.
Yeah,
Lepke Buckhalter was supposedly the chairman of Murder Incorporated.
Right,
he ended up being, put to death in an electric chair. He was a very bad person. But anyway, I think his name is Zwillman, Abe Zwillman. He provided safe harbor to Vern Miller and fixed him up with a false identification as a optical salesman, a glass salesman, for glasses, reading glasses and vision glasses. And then sent him out on the road, as a traveling salesperson. So if he got stopped, he'd be able to show police, well, this is what I do. I'm selling glasses. Well, meanwhile, Vern Miller's wife, and I'll say putative wife with her too, because who knows what their legal relationship was, but she makes her way to Chicago. And she was actually a fascinating lady. Her name was Vivian Vi Mathias. She was the girlfriend of Vern Miller, and she started off her life as a farm girl in Brainerd, Minnesota, and she met Miller at age 19 and stayed with him for 7 years as they moved from place to place as Miller plied his criminal ways. And she had a daughter named Betty that lived with Vern Miller at the Brookside Bungalow home at 6612 Edgevale Road. And so Vi Mathias has returned to Chicago. And so the FBI is staking out her apartment because they know Vern's going to go hold of her. They just know it. So they're just biding their time. Mm-hmm. And so this is Halloween 1933, and the FBI is all positioned outside of Vi Mathias's apartment. And sure enough, Vern Miller shows up in his, new disguise as a traveling salesman. And they report, the FBI is watching this, and they see him go up into the apartment, and they report back to Washington, D.C., and they said, we got him. And D.C. says, are you sure it's him? And the field guys go, well, we're mostly sure. Yeah, we think it's him. And they said, well, no, you can't do it till you're totally sure. And they said, well, we really think it's him. Well, not until you know it's him. Well, that bit of, indecision was just enough so that Vern Miller was starting to leave the apartment when all of a sudden he sees two men down the hallway starting to walk toward him, and he gets spooked, and he starts running down the middle stairs of the apartment building. And meanwhile, there's other agents that are coming up on the elevators. And so this big...
Nobody covered the stairs.
Nobody covered the stairs and gets away, but a huge shootout in the middle of the traffic rush hour in Chicago on Halloween. And Vern Miller commandeers a car. We would call it, carjacks a car today, and makes his getaway. It was a big, blown opportunity by the FBI, and it brought a lot of indignity to J. Edgar Hoover, and he wasn't. I think Melvin Purvis was the one who was in charge of the operation.
Yeah, that's right. He was a Chicago agent.
Yeah, and boy, that was kind of because Melvin Purvis, who should have had a fantastic career with the FBI, was forced out of the FBI
because of that blown.
Yeah, that. And then also he was starting to become as well or better known than J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, I've read that.
And Director Hoover just, couldn't abide by that. So
was Vern Miller, was he connected to those Chicago, to the mob?
Yeah, he
Capone
was.
And them. So he had done some
dirty work for them. Yeah. And you never know about these things because, it's kind of like, well, what have you done for me lately? And frankly,
That's true.
you being one of the most highly sought after men in the country are not doing us any favors by showing back up on our home
and
turf.
having a shootout with the police.
Right. So I know the guy Abner Longies Willman is the guy that helped.
Longies Willman.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're East Coast mobsters.
They're East Coast. And I mean, just as a little bit of a footnote, Abner Longies Willman was killed for assisting Vern Miller. He was executed, not by authorities, but by the mob. He did something on his own that he shouldn't have. But by this time now in October, on Halloween of 1933, he has this big shootout in Chicago. So he goes on the lam again. Where does he go? He goes up to Detroit.
He had those connections with the Purple Gang in Detroit, which was the syndicate or the mafia kind
most
of
powerful
Jewish,
gang. That's what it was
in the United States at the time.
Perhaps, but they did not appreciate Vern Miller's
too much heat
appearance there in the Motor City, and so they did not treat him kindly. Miller brought unwanted heat on the Purple Gang in Detroit and essentially was brutally disposed of. His body was badly beaten and found naked and bound with clothesline and wrapped in cheap blankets and found in a ditch about 11 miles from the heart of Detroit in 1933. And it appears that he had his skull bashed in with a hammer or some other type of blunt instrument, because there is a death photo of Vern Miller where he was murdered. So he was tortured for being a bad guy by bringing on heat locally. So in November of 1933, they know that Vern Miller participated, but he's dead. And so now they're trying to piece things together. Meanwhile, they've arrested Vi Mathias, Vern Miller's girlfriend, but she was a tough gal, and she would not testify. No,
wow.
And they did all kinds of things. They put a stool pigeon in her jail cell to try and befriend her and get her to talk that way, and she never really did spill the beans. But she went to prison for several years because of her association with Vern Miller. So now you got Pretty Boy Floyd and you've got Adam Richetti still hiding out in Buffalo, New York. When in October of 1934, so approximately 16 months after the Union Station Massacre, they are going stir crazy in this apartment, the four of them. They barely stand each other any longer, and they play cards, and the women read, gossip magazines, and they listen to the radio, and then they play cards, and then they read gossip magazines, and they cook, and they're just, if they want anything, they send the girls out to the grocery store to buy stuff, always with cash, and so it's a terrible life. It's miserable. And finally, Pretty Boy Floyd says, "Who wants to go home?" And they're all like, "I do," and all of them are like, "Yes, let's go back," And so, sure enough, they pile into the automobile. Pretty Boy Floyd sends one of the girls out to go buy an automobile and pay cash for it. And they're on their way back to the Midwest when Pretty Boy Floyd's driving, and it's early in the morning, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden he has an accident. He hits something, and so they're all assembled there on the roadway when Pretty Boy said, "All right, well, here's the plan. We're going to send the girls back to town to get a tow truck to come back and help fix our car, and Adam and I will stay here and we'll just wait." So the sun comes up. Farmers are up early in this section of Ohio. East Liverpool, Ohio is where this all kind of goes down. Pretty Boy and Adam Richetti kind of scoot up the hill from where the car is on the road when the local police get a report of some suspicious-looking characters that are on, hillside there. And the reason why is because Adam Richetti and Pretty Boy Floyd are, they're in dress shoes, wearing 3-piece suits, and, they're not out there camping. The local sheriff decides to go and investigate it, and he's walking by, and he's trying to act nonchalant, and and he says good morning to him, and they exchange a couple of pleasantries when Adam Richetti says he's the law, and he pulls a gun out on him, and this local sheriff, he too pulls a gun, and he and Adam Richetti are having a shootout with each other. Meanwhile, Pretty Boy Floyd just runs. He just goes. The sheriff was about to kill Adam Richetti when he gave up. He threw down his weapon and he gave up. And so now they had Adam Richetti a few hours, and they figured out who they had on their hands. And then, massive manhunt for Pretty Boy Floyd there in Ohio. And he's on the run for like 2 days, and they can't find him. But meanwhile, Melvin Purvis has come in from Chicago, and they've got 200 or so people. Pretty Boy Floyd on the run, and he finally shows up at this one lady's farmhouse, and he's starving. He begs her for a piece of meat. He just says, I'm so hungry. And so she feeds him a meal, a really good meal, like, meat and potatoes and green beans. And I think he had, like pumpkin pie for dessert, and he's just loving it, and declared that to be the best meal he'd ever eaten in his life. And so now he is going to take one of this nice farm lady's cars. Ellen Kunkel was her name, and make his getaway. And as he is sitting in the car waiting for these other farm people to get in the car with him, who he has talked into driving him into town so he can get transportation, the police, the authorities all start to arrive at the farm. And so he gets out of the car, and when the lawmen pull up, they can see behind a chicken coop Pretty Boy Floyd's feet going back and forth, and then they yell to him to stop, and Pretty Boy Floyd just takes off across a prairie toward some woods. He's going to go back in the woods and try and escape that way. When the lawmen tracking him just shot him in the back from behind, they were able to get a couple of good shots off, and they shot him. So they rushed up to Floyd, and they take him and they drag him over to like an apple tree, and they put him underneath this apple tree, and they said, "Are you Charles Arthur Floyd?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm Floyd." And they said, "Tell us what happened at the plaza in Kansas City." That's what they used to call the Union Station. They used to call it the plaza. Yeah, the Pretty Boy Floyd. They said, "Tell us what happened in Kansas City." And Pretty Boy Floyd said, "I'm not telling you sons of bitches nothing." And then he dies. Now, years later in the 70s, Time magazine did an article with one of the lawmen that was present who said that one of the other lawmen put a bullet in Pretty Boy Floyd, executed him there. Because again, Pretty Boy Floyd could not resist Kansas City, the temptation and the lure of the prostitution and the gambling and the alcohol and the great music that was available here. He just loved Kansas City. Well, he was put into a box, and he was shipped on rail through Kansas City, and it was shipped to Oklahoma, where he was buried. So there you go. Now you have Verne Miller dead, and you have Pretty Boy Floyd dead, and the only guy left is Adam Richetti. He refuses to ever say anything about anything other than to protest his innocence. And they have a trial that was prosecuted by a U.S. attorney who would later run against Harry Truman in the 1940 Harry Truman's 1940 election, and they managed to convict Adam Richetti, and they killed him. I believe Adam Richetti was the sixth person to die in the gas chamber in Missouri. He was killed on October 7th, 1938. And he basically was the fall person for the Union Station Massacre. But you may be wondering, okay, but still, how did they connect Pretty Boy Floyd with Vern Miller? Where is that nexus?
I'm not hearing
There's
that.
Still a disconnect
here,
right? So
only through the mob, but the mob's not talking.
Right. So how do they do it? Well, it's a crazy story, but on July 10th, 1934, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, Johnny Lazia is living on Armour Boulevard. And he pulls up in his automobile being driven by Charlie Corolla. And Johnny Lazia is in the back seat, and his wife, Maria, is in the front seat. And he gets out of the car in front of the Park Place apartments there on Armour Boulevard. And as he's getting out of the car, machine gun blasts and shotgun blasts from about 20, 25 feet away of these guys hiding behind a wall rip through Johnny Lazia. And he screams at Corolla to get Marie out of there. And meanwhile, Johnny Lazia is lying on the ground, screaming in utter pain, writhing in pain. Someone, please help him, please help him. They take him to St. Joe Hospital, and he doesn't die for about 12 hours. Meanwhile, they did multiple blood transfusions of him, and he's just screaming in bloody pain and misery before he dies. And anybody goes to see him. They got armed guards all around the hospital when Lazia is suffering there. They, of course, Tom Pendergast is summoned, and he said, and Dr. Nigro, who was the mob, of that era, he comes on the scene, and Henry McElroy is there, the city manager. I mean, everybody's there. And so Lazia dies. And it's like one of the largest funerals that's ever been held in Kansas City before. Some 10,000 people turned out for his wake and his funeral. And so shortly after Lazia's death, a mob war breaks out in Kansas City because those that are behind Johnny Lazia, they know who killed him. It was consisted of a guy named O'Brien out of Chicago, a guy named Little Nugie LaPluma, who they never got him. And then they got another guy named Jimmy Needles LaCapra.
I thought Jimmy Needles was part of that team.
Jimmy Needles was part of that whole deal. And so and then this other guy whose name I want to share with you because he died a particularly unpleasant death. His name was Jack Gregory, alias Griffin. Now, he paid for his life for killing Johnny Lazia when the KC mob threw him alive into the furnace of a building.
Oh, wow.
And then there was another assassin. His name was Al O'Brien, who managed to escape. And Al O'Brien actually became a big member of the Teamsters Union in the Northwest, on the northwest side of the country, up in Seattle or Portland. Those there.
And then there was a younger guy, younger than him, might have been his son named Chucky O'Brien, who was connected with Hoffa.
And I think that's the connection. Yeah. Huh. And so Al O'Brien actually had a shootout with Kansas City mobsters in Denver and actually came up on the winning side of that shootout. Wow. But he managed to make his way to the West Coast and become involved in corrupt union activities there. And then Little Nugie LaPluma, a neighborhood friend of LaCapra, also vanished. And so, there are some that say LaPluma was the actual trigger man who shot Lazia, but there were two of them. And so it was probably O'Brien or Griffin. So you have four guys that killed Lazia. They were all involved. Al O'Brien, Little Nugie LaPluma, Jack Gregory, alias Griffin, and Jimmy Needles LaCapra. And so there's this mob war going on in Kansas City. They're trying to kill all these guys. And they have this big shootout with Jimmy Needles LaCapra in Kansas City. Well, he decides that he's going to flee Kansas City, and he's going to go seek refuge with some relatives in Argonia, Kansas, which is just to the southwest of Wichita, Kansas. And so the mob sends three guys down, three young men, and I'm looking at their pictures right now: Jerome Creets, John Pace, Pace, that in Italian you would pronounce that Pace, yeah. And then a guy named Bobby McCoy. And these guys all went down and they had a shootout with Jimmy Needles LaCapra. The highway patrol comes on the scene, and Jimmy Needles LaCapra seeks refuge with the highway patrol. Please, they're here to kill me. Give me cover. Give me safety. I'm afraid they're going to kill me. And so they take Jimmy Needles LaCapra back to the highway patrol office, and then they round up these three guys and they bring them back to the highway patrol office. So they got everybody that's involved in this crazy shootout going on back at highway patrol quarters there in Kansas when word reaches Kansas City that they've caught Jimmy Needles LaCapra. Well, one of the most corrupt Kansas City police officers then makes his way down to Argonia, Kansas, because he wants to take custody of Jimmy Needles LaCapra. And when they say, well, wait a minute, under what authority are you doing this? He says, because it is for crimes against the machine. And they said, crimes against the machine, what is that? And so they are unwilling to turn Jimmy Needles over to this cop from Kansas City who clearly, and we know who he was, and we know he's been involved in other murders, that he was going to kill Jimmy Needles LaCapra. It's pretty sure.
He was not going to make it back to Kansas City, was he?
No. Well, meanwhile, though, the feds had heard about it, too. And so a couple of FBI agents go rushing down there, and they take custody of Jimmy Needles LaCapra. And then he gives this incredible statement. I mean, it's like a 25 or 30-page statement, the whole story about how Johnny Lazia was there at the Harvey restaurant on June 16th, the night before the Union Station Massacre, and how word reached him that Pretty Boy Floyd had arrived in town, and then how when Verne Miller came and how he connected Verne Miller with Pretty Boy Floyd. And that is exactly what J. Edgar Hoover needed. He needed that as his basically as to wrap up the whole thing, to tie it up and put a bow on it and say, this is what happened. We've got our story. Now, I believe Jimmy Needles LaCapra. And the reason why I do is there is no way that first of all, he wasn't that intelligent of a man. Limited education. He was a street thug. He was a boxing promoter. He was trying to move in on the rackets. He wasn't that impressive of a character. And there is no way that he could have given the depth of detail in his statement that he gave, recounting all of the events, both before and after the massacre, if he did not have personal knowledge of it. Yes, he was there when Vern Miller came. He says he was there when Vern Miller, and it would make sense because he used to be part of Lazia's inner circle, because he was Sam Scola's cousin, Sammy the Hog Scola. And then what happened was Jimmy Needles LaCapra hooked up with this O'Brien guy and this Griffin guy, and they wanted to muscle in on some rackets that Lazia had, specifically a restaurant bar that they wanted to take over, and Lazia wouldn't let them do it. And then they wanted to take over some of the unions in town. So Jimmy Needles LaCapra really provided the answer that J. Edgar Hoover needed for the Union Station Massacre. And let me tell you why I believe it. I mean, first of all, I believe him because the detail that he's got, the recollection and the specific small little details, he just could not make this stuff up. Mm-hmm. It would have been impossible for him to give that depth of detail with all these different characters and all this timeline and all these specific things that he knew about. Like the stolen car from St. Louis. He knew about that. They met. When they gave Pretty Boy Floyd and Adam Richetti weaponry afterward, they did it at a drugstore that was a notorious mob hangout on the North End here. He specifically said it was my cousin who gave, Sam Scola's the one who gave him these guns. Well, here's what really seals the deal for me is that when they caught Adam Richetti in and around East Liverpool, Ohio in October of 1933, October of 1934, so 16 months later, he had on him a 45 semi-automatic pistol. Well, that pistol had been stolen from the Kansas City, Kansas U.S.
Armory. They had a big gun
in
robbery.
1932. Right. And it was Lazia's gang that stole them.
Right.
And well, how do we know this? Well, because several of the guns were used in the shootout on the Armour Boulevard with Sheriff Bash. That's what, Charlie Gargano was shooting at Sheriff Bash with. That's what they killed the guy that they were going after. Adam Richetti has this stolen weapon that Lazia's gang had broken into the armory. There is no way that Adam Richetti would have had one of those 45s with the serial number from the U.S. Armory on it had Lazia's gang not given it to him. Mm-hmm. Clearly establishes a nexus between Pretty Boy Floyd, Adam Richetti, and the Lazia organization. And then you bring in Jimmy Needles' story that corroborates so much of it that I do think, frankly, that they did get it for the most part. I do think that they got it right.
I think so. Plus, he wanted protection from the FBI at that point in time. Yeah. He had to have it. And I assume they gave him some kind of protection.
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
No. They gave him enough protection so that Maurice Milligan, who was the U.S. attorney at the time, cut a deal and said, well, we'll give you protection if you'll testify. And he said, all right, I'll testify. So he testified, and they said, okay, your protection's over. That's all we got.
That's U.S. attorney for you, man. When they're done with you, they're done.
They're done.
Back then, especially.
There was no witness protection program. It didn't exist. And so Jimmy Needles LaCapra, he starts heading, back toward the Northeast, and he's later found shot and killed in New York. And that's simply because they just, they're not nobody's going to provide safe harbor to. Right. First of all, he's a rat.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And they killed Johnny Lazia was the syndicate recognized Johnny Lazia as authority. You kill the head in Kansas City, you're going to be in trouble. So don't expect to get any protection from the rackets back. I'll tell you that he was shot at the base of his skull on or around August 26, 1935, near Plattsville, New York. Now, here's the thing I'll tell you, that people who want to argue the conspiracy about how this whole thing went down, I mean, that's fine, okay? But until you read all of Jimmy Needles' statement, I included a couple of key pages of it in my book, and I do things like that because I know people are interested in this stuff, and they'll get out their magnifying glass and they'll look at what this says. Yeah. But these are only a couple of, about a 30-page statement. And so if you don't read that statement, you don't know what you're talking about, is my feeling about it. So
how'd you find that statement? Was that in the Freedom of Information Act? Or
it was. It was provided to me by the FBI. The FBI gave me all of their files that they had related to the Union Station Massacre. And then also Bob Unger and I, we swapped a lot of it.
Okay.
We had a blast working together. It was kind of funny. He and I met at a restaurant bar on the plaza, and I told him about my project. I was going to be doing this film and how I really could use his help. And he said, he goes, I've been just such a fool. He goes, I really probably should have been capitalizing on this more. And I said, well, so over drinks, we made this deal together. And I mean, we had about a 4-hour conversation. It was a blast. And he's a good man. And so
he's a professor at UMKC.
Yeah, I believe he's emeritus now. And I think he's doing other writings right now. But anyway, so Bob basically opened up his file to me. And I used him as a consultant on my film, and then also I used him as an interview subject on the film. And so he does a great job of telling a lot of the story in the film.
So thanks a lot, guys. That's the third and final installment of the story of the Union Station Massacre. We've heard of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and somebody asked, why was there such a outcry about the Union Station Massacre at the time, whereas there wasn't such an outcry on the St. Valentine's Day Massacre? Well, because in St. Valentine's Massacre, there was only other gang members that got killed. That was Bugs Moran gang, and a lot of them got killed. And it was a Capone gang, or Capone hired the Egan's Rats to come up out of St. Louis or Detroit, wherever they were at the time, and do that St. Valentine's Day massacre. But the Union Station Massacre, law enforcement got killed, and it just flew in the face of all organized, the justice system at the time. Everybody was kind of laissez-faire, like, oh, well, these traveling bank robbers, they're just robbing from banks. It's depression. Everybody needs money. They're like going out and giving money to poor people, supposedly, and they weren't really. They were, some of them might have taken it back to their families, but mainly they were just living that life, of a bank robber, of a gangster. A gangster gets a lot of money, goes and gambles and drinks and whores around till he spends it all, and then he goes get some more money. That's the way of a gangster. That's just the way it is. So this has been that story, and that story after those 4 lawmen got killed by those 4 gangsters. Boy, I tell you what, the shit hit the fan. They cracked down, and it's shortly after that they, of course, they get Pretty Boy Floyd, they get Adam Richetti. Verne Miller gets killed before they can get him. Jelly Nice is already dead. The heat was on Dillinger, and Dillinger gets killed. Who was the other one? There was another one, real famous one, that got killed. Machine Gun Kelly. All these guys, the FBI and local law enforcement really went after these guys after they killed 4 law enforcement officers. Oh, Bonnie and Clyde, they killed a couple of New York or Texas state troopers down there. And boy, when they caught them, there was no mercy at all. That was like an ambush in the Gaza Strip or something by the Israelis, man. When they walked into that kill zone, or over in Vietnam, and when they walk in that kill zone, that's it. It's done. So that's kind of the end of the story. Thanks a lot to Greg Scavuzzo, one of our longtime YouTube fans, who actually his ancestor Jimmy's Needles LaCapra was involved in this, and in the aftermath of it, and got caught up in it, and ended up getting killed himself. But anyhow, guys, I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed these 3 bonus episodes. You may have already heard them a long time ago on my audio app, and they've not been on YouTube. If you didn't want to listen to them, you didn't miss anything, because I threw these all up as bonus episodes, you might notice. So thanks a lot, guys. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that button down below. And don't forget to tell your friends and put it on your Facebook page and tell everybody you know about it, because we want to get as many listeners as we can. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot, guys.